morning and welcome to today's webinar, a crash course in performance consulting, which will be presented by Arun Pradhan. My name is Shai Desai. I'm a co-founder alongside Arun of modelthinkers.com. For those of us, I guess, that haven't met each other, Model Thinkers is a new digital solution that empowers you to be smarter, faster. We're creating an actionable playbook of the world's most powerful ideas that you can use to make better decisions, interrupt biases, and solve complex problems. If you head over to modelthinkers.com, you'll see that this week's model of the week, the confirmation heuristic, leads you to seek out information that confirms your existing beliefs, mental models, and hypotheses, while discounting information that refutes them. So whether you're an information or decision maker, or an entrepreneur, or an innovator, or somebody that just wants to learn how to work smarter and be more impactful, I hope you'll join us over at modelthinkers.com. Be sure to sign up to our free newsletter, which is written by Arun and gives you some more insight into how his mind works each week. So on to today's webinar, a crash course in performance consulting. Most of us know Arun as an unashamed geek when it comes to cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, marketing, and anything that comes or provides insights to how people think, behave, and change. Today's workshop is based on Arun's approach to performance partnering and includes a 15-page design for performance guide, complete with conversation prompts and examples. So thanks again for joining us on this morning webinar. As you'll see on screen, please do visit menti.com and use the code you see on screen, 5517598, to join the conversation live. And we hope that you'll also visit modelthinkers.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Over to you, Arun.
Thanks heaps, Shai, and thanks for joining everyone, especially those of you who are in crazy time zones. You'll be pleased to know that we did remember to press the record button. That's why I didn't promise that we were going to record it, because I just always forget to press the record button. It is recording right now. So if you are in a crazy time zone, feel free just to sort of half snooze. That's all good. I need to apologize. The book that I've promised you is a bit delayed. My workload is more than I thought at this time of the year. And so we're getting you that book, the book to go along with this performance consulting approach, which is a really supported guide, early next year. I'll just stay in touch and I'll shoot a message when it's ready. So lots of messages on Menti. Please do jump into Menti if you haven't done so already. Open up a browser window, menti.com, go to that code 55517598, or Shai has just posted the link in the chat if you want to open it up in your browser, but it works really well on the phone. Look, this won't be the last time you'll hear from me, so don't worry. Looking forward to hearing about performance consulting. There's taking a deep dive into performance. I think about half the people, oh gosh, there's over 100 and almost 200 people on the call at the moment. So do jump into Menti, because it looks like only about 60 of you have jumped in so far. So I'm going to jump straight in because we've got a lot to get through. So virtual body language, for those of you who haven't been on one of my sessions before, I can't see you. So I do use virtual body language. So if you want to click on a heart to say this is useful at any time, if you want to click on the question mark to say, can you please explain if I haven't explained it well enough or just skipped over something. The cat means you've got it, move on. And the cat is a really useful symbol. I used to have thumbs down, but people didn't like clicking on the thumbs down. So the cat for me is like if I saw you checking your phone, or if I saw you snoozing or losing interest, that's it. Sometimes I speak on this page for a really, really long time just to make people click on the cat and feel liberated. And then obviously via Menti, you can ask a question at any time or even add a comment at any time. It will pop up as a number down here. I won't necessarily get to it straight away, but I'll get to it. I'll pause at different points and get to it when I can. Thanks for the person clicking on the cat so far. I won't always respond straight away to these comments down the bottom, but I will get to them as soon as possible. Okay, so what I'm going to go through is really quickly, 3 quick reasons why you should care. I'm not going to spend long because you're already here. You obviously already care about performance consulting. Then the bulk of this session is performance consulting, a scenario with Dave. And I'll introduce you to Dave shortly. And then at the end is a brief note on solution design. Honestly, the solution design thing is another whole talk. I'm literally just going to show you some slides and give you some references. It's going to be annoyingly fast and superficial, but it's at least introducing you to say, here's points and what points, some directions. The good thing is that the performance consulting piece is the bit that requires skill and practice. That's why I'm spending longer on it. In many ways, the actual solution, by the time you get to the solution design, it's less complicated. It's kind of more straightforward. It's less skillful. It's more about using the evidence-based knowledge to design an approach. So that's why I can sort of brush over it at the end. That's my justification for skipping over it at the end. So first, we're going to go through 3 quick reasons why you should care about performance consulting. And again, quickly, because you're already here, you already care. So firstly, going to the L&D disconnect, and I captured this comic, God, years ago now. It was maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago. Talking about, someone saying, fantastic news, e-learning completion is way up and our latest workshops are getting brilliant feedback, and just being disconnected from what the organization is doing and the pain of the organization or the point of the organization, us being in our own little silo. So that's reason 1. Reason 2 is that training isn't always the answer, and you probably have seen this one around. It's been around for a while now. I did this a few years ago too. That is where there's a challenge and the person says, I can't swim. So what they asked for is the International Aquatic Training Centre. What they budgeted for is the wading pool. What the expert wants to cover is history of swimming and just lots of content. What the training vendor pitched, which is a 4-day workshop. What the e-learning vendor pitched, which is welcome to iSwim. What they settled for is a coach. And, if you want someone to learn to swim, it's actually a pretty good solution to give them a coach. It's not bad at all. But the performance solution they actually needed was a floating device. Because here, what they're actually saying is, not necessarily I can't swim, they're self-diagnosing, they think that's the problem, but really what they're saying is I need to get across this body of water. To get across that body of water, you might build a bridge, you might give them a boat, you might drain the lake. There's a number of different things you can do, including giving them a floating device. So it's not always just listening to the request or the order from our stakeholder. It's actually trying to dig deeper and problem solve more creatively about how we can get the results that they want, rather than just giving them the direct answer that they've asked for. And finally, my 3rd reason is that people are drowning. Like, people are drowning in content. They're drowning in overwhelm. They've just got too much on their plate. So, and we're adding to that by just generating more content as course factories, and just following the principle of less is generally more. One of the things I was doing when I was working with L&D teams is just getting them to have a circuit breaker as they're doing the design piece, to say, imagine if we had to shift this behavior or change this performance dial, and we weren't able to create any more content, we weren't able to deliver any more courses, what would we do? And often you are going to deliver some form of content or even some sort of supported course or campaign or something. But even just starting from that point allows you to consider other options. Like, is it about facilitating team conversations, or is it about just creating some organized serendipity where people are meeting at the right time, at the right, in the right part of the process? So there's a range of things there. But you're here, thanks for the cat. You're here, you know why you should care. So I'm going to dive into this scenario with Dave. I am going to go through this pretty fast. It is being recorded, and I don't know, it's hopefully it's not too fast and just the speed for most of you. So this is based on the performance canvas that I developed a few years ago. It's this 2-page document that's available free on my website. And again, I'll be offering the guide to go with it. It's like about a 15-page guide, or probably a bit longer by the time I get finished with it. And it gives you a step-by-step, even prompts of what you can say at different parts of the conversation. And I want to talk through it when I found it's most useful. The reason I created it was I found that there was a key sliding door moment when a stakeholder asks for training or comes in with a request. And in that moment, you can go down a number of different paths. You can either go down that, yes, I'll get it for you, and become the sort of order taker, creating content that they've requested, or there is a way that you can actually reframe that order taker request. It's not always successful. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed approach, but it certainly allows you to help reframe it more often and go a different direction. And I want to walk you through that sort of scenario this time. The process is basically, firstly, the invitation, where you get a request and you've got to try to engage with that stakeholder to have a broader conversation, a bigger, longer conversation. And then it's very simple at its base. it's essentially a gap analysis. And I imagine most of you would, or pretty much all of you would be doing a gap analysis as part of your training needs analysis or learning analysis or whatever you want to call it. You'll be doing some form of this. And so it's a lot of it will be familiar. It's probably just bundled together differently than you might be familiar with, and emphasizing different aspects maybe. So firstly, it's starting with future state, starting with what success looks like, looking at current state and doing that through the vision of personas, looking at the gap and doing that through the perspective of what behavior change are we trying to create. So that's the gap analysis that I'll be going through in the scenario. And then after that is the solution design, which again, I'll be going through only very quickly at the end. Now, again, I want to stress, if you've got questions, you've got comments, please put them in Menti so I can see what's going on your mind. So I want to introduce Dave. It's a quick worked example. Do not get caught up in the specifics. It's a sales example. So if your organization doesn't do sales in the traditional sense, then yeah, please just have that sense of focusing on the transferable concepts and techniques rather than worrying about, oh, I don't do sales. So just imagine, just like cast your mind into this scenario where it's early on Monday, you're back in the office, and yes, you do have to use your imagination probably for many of you still, and you're making your way to your first coffee. You've just turned on the computer and you're wandering over to get your first coffee. And suddenly you hear Dave's voice in the distance. You know Dave, you've talked to him a lot, and he's calling to you from his office. So that's what's happened so far. So we've just got one question here, or comment here. Will you please share the link for the performance canvas? Couldn't find it on the site. I'm not sure if you can find it, Shai. Pretty sure it's a link on the homepage, but we'll share that by the end of the session or after the session. So Dave says, hey, I'm glad I bumped into you. My sales team needs to get across the spin sales approach. I've got a PowerPoint that covers it really well, and I need you to turn it into a few e-learning modules. I'll shoot the PowerPoint through to you now, okay? So whether you get a written kind of, thanks for the shares, whether you get a written a written request or a verbal request, this is probably a familiar situation for many of you. Someone's dumped some content on your lap and they've said they need to turn it into e-learning modules or a face-to-face workshop. So Dave in particular has said that he wants to get the sales team, which he heads up, across spin sales. So, and he's given you the PowerPoint with the content. So my question to you is, what would you say to Dave? Would you say, what's the closest replication of what you would say? Would you say, sounds good, I'll go through the deck and get back to you with next steps? Would you say, sure, Dave, but can you tell me why you've chosen spin over other sales models? Would you say, happy to help, I'll look at the deck, when can we book in 30 minutes to discuss? Or would you say, thanks, Dave, but before any deck, we really need to book you in for a 30-minute meeting? I didn't have the option that you probably want to say, which is, seriously, Dave, you've got your coffee. Let me have my coffee, Dave. You're always so insensitive, Dave. No, that's not what you would say to Dave. So which of these would you actually say? And if you haven't jumped into Menti yet, please open up a browser window, go to menti.com and type in that code 55517598. And I think Shai's chucked in the code into the chat as well. It works really well on your phone. We've probably only got less than half the people so far. I know there's a few more people coming in. So there's half of you who haven't jumped in yet. So please do jump into Menti. And again, you can ask questions at any time at Menti. So far the results, no one's saying sounds good and I'll get back to you. A few people are saying, sure, but tell me more about spin sales. The challenge with that in my mind is it takes you down a kind of rabbit hole of talking about spin sales when you really know what the problem is. Most of you are saying this, happy to help. Some of you, a fair chunk of you are saying, thanks, Dave, but before any deck, we really need to book you into the meeting. I really get that. I mean, in my opinion, in my opinion, this would be the response I would go for. So I'd agree with the majority of you. That thanks, Dave, but before we look at any deck, we need to book you in for a meeting is what I want to say. But the way I handle Dave is by saying this one, because you want to acknowledge the work that Dave's done. Dave spent his time preparing this deck. You've got to take the deck and then you've also got to book the meeting. Even though you take the deck though, my big warning here is do not make eye contact with the PowerPoint. It's a real temptation as soon as you've taken that deck and acknowledged the deck from Dave, that you just look into the content. And we've all got that instructional design brain somewhere in us. No matter what role we play, we've probably kept that instructional design brain. And you'll suddenly see in the deck how Dave's organized it in an illogical flow, where he hasn't got a hook up front, or he hasn't got mini reflection points or whatever. And you start to analyze it from an instructional designer's point of view, and it's too early to do that. Basically, you don't want to make eye contact with the PowerPoint because you don't want to go down the vortex of content yet. You're going to have to deal with content probably, but you don't want to start with a vortex of content just from a deck that he's thrown you. So yeah, focusing on content up front will lead you on a pathway to despair. So it's a balance, right? You've got to acknowledge Dave and take the deck, and you've got to not let the deck define your agenda. So it's a real balancing act that you've got to do there. So you've asked Dave for a meeting, and Dave says, a meeting? Well, I'm pretty busy. I'll send you the PowerPoint. Just let me know if you have any questions and we can go from there. So Dave's resisting, as typical Dave, right? So how would you respond? You can actually respond by saying, you can explain that you can only proceed with the meeting first. You can accept the PowerPoint and come back to Dave later and then try again with the meeting. You can explain how important the meeting is to your process, or you can try to sell the idea of the meeting to Dave. What would you do? I like this one because it's kind of entertaining. You can watch the dots. If you haven't joined us on Menti yet, I see a bunch of people haven't necessarily done that, and you want to see your dot live on screen, go to menti.com and use that code 5557598. You can also just do it on a phone or follow the link that Shai's just done. Thanks, Shai. So this kind of disturbingly wobbly lump of dots here is that just me who finds that, looking at that, disturbing? I don't know. So explain how important the meeting is to your process. And then there's an even split. Oh, just a late lead from trying to sell the idea, accept the PowerPoint and come back to Dave later. Only a few of them saying you can't proceed with the meeting. Look, again, I'm not saying one is correct. I'm only telling you what I would do in this situation. And what I would do is try to sell the idea of the meeting to Dave. And obviously, I mean, I use the word sell because it probably annoyed a lot of you, because a lot of people have an aversion to the word sell. Which is why so many of you probably went with explain how more important the meeting is to your process. My problem with explaining how important the meeting is to my process to Dave is Dave doesn't care. Dave's got his own life. Dave's got his own priorities. Dave had 10 to-do lists for the morning, and talking to us was one of them. He's ticked it off. He thought that was one of the simplest things on his to-do list. If we start lecturing him about, not lecturing, if we start explaining to him about our process and our world, Dave's just not going to care, right? So we've got to put things in Dave's terms. So, if you have an aversion to selling or whatever, I'd ask you to get over it, because we are going to have to influence. To get things done in a performance consulting or any consulting context, we have to influence. And to do that, you have to be aware of sales. And partly what sales is doing is knowing how to communicate effectively with people so they care. So here's one response you might ask or might give to Dave. So Dave, I know you're really busy. That's why I'm suggesting we lock in this meeting. This meeting will ensure that my team is clear on how we can deliver the most impact possible with this project. And we also know from experience that having this upfront meeting will save you time over the course of the project. So if you see what I've done there, basically, I've focused on time and value, because that's what matters to Dave. So rather than talking about, well, Dave, you see, this process is part of a 10-step thing that we've shown in our group that we have to go through, and we have to work through this. That's all about me. So instead, I'm going to make it about Dave and stuff that Dave cares about. So what does he care about? He cares about his time, and he cares about his impact. So basically, from a sales point of view, you're basically communicating from a benefit perspective rather than just describing your process. So some of you may have thought that's what you're voting for when you said, I'll vote for talking about how important my process is. But I did want to emphasize the sales element. It's not crude sales. It's not hitting people over the head, but you're basically positioning it as a way for you to learn more. So it's not about making Dave wrong. It's about us, not Dave. It's a focus on the fact that it will save them time. That's for me, you know, like if you ask, whenever you do a persona, wherever you start, well, they're so busy, they don't have time. Like, yeah, it's almost unsaid that everyone is busy, no one has time. So if you can actually position your things, Dave, this meeting up front, we know from experience will save you time over the project because it means that we're on track from the start and we won't have as many check-in points. We'll still have some check-in points, but it will just be much more efficient, be less time for you overall. And we know that it's going to ensure that we get the best results possible for your project because that's what our process has shown. So you kind of just, again, and you see how I'm positioning it as what we've shown, what we've realized. I'm positioning myself as the expert who has the background, who can make this call. Finally, it's an invitation, and you might get rejected, like with any invitation, and that's okay. The key thing with an invitation is you're still trying to position yourself for next time. You're still trying to put it out there that you want to be able to deliver more value by having this conversation with them. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So Dave has arrived for the meeting and he says, okay, so have you read the PowerPoint? Like I said, it is everything you need. Let's use this time to talk about how we can use gamification. My team are pretty competitive, so I think it will add a lot. So at this point, I imagine that Dave might be feeling pretty familiar to you. So Dave has come in to the meeting. You've got 30 minutes and he's led with saying that his team is competitive and wants to talk about gamification options. So how would you respond? Would you explain that it's too early to jump into gamification options? Would you thank and acknowledge Dave, then keep working to your plan? Would you ask Dave what he means by gamification? Or would you outline gamification pros and cons before moving on? Jump into Menti if you haven't done so, it's not too late. And again, at any point, if you want to ask a question or make a comment on screen, just write it into the Menti chat. Okay, a big one about ask Dave. Ask Dave what he means by gamification is very popular this time of year. I actually thought the outline gamification pros and cons would be more popular. Second is thank and acknowledge Dave, then keep working. Again, I didn't put the option here saying, Dave, seriously, you've got to stop reading HBR articles before you come into meetings. But explain that it's too early to jump into gamification, not so popular. Okay, I'll show you what I would lean towards. Again, like you might be able to do any of these in a more effective way. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. I can only tell you what I would do in this situation. I got a comment here. Really cool interactive. Thank you. It was hard for me to type that on the side. No, I'm kidding. So I would actually go with thank and acknowledge Dave, then keep working to your plan. Here's the problem with asking Dave what he means by gamification. As soon as you ask Dave about gamification, look, what's actually happened here is someone has walked into the meeting, your meeting, where you've got a plan and you've only got 30 minutes, and that 30 minutes is not long, right? I'd rather book an hour, but I know Dave, and I know Dave isn't going to go for an hour, so I'm going to have to book him for 30, right? So you're already up against it. And Dave has walked in with this shiny thing and waved it in front of your face. If you start asking Dave what he means by gamification, it's like the PowerPoint. Like you are trying to get this job done and people are throwing you, your stakeholders are throwing you these kind of hooks to take you in particular directions. And yes, you've got to acknowledge and understand where they're coming from and understand what's going on for them, but you can't be distracted at this point. Like if it was a crazy complex job and, you know, you had no idea which direction it was going to go, maybe you might want to explore a bit more up front. But for most jobs, like, you know, it's a spin sales thing, I think you can probably more confidently be a bit more directive with your approach. Yeah. So yeah, it is actually that. It's showing that you're the expert. It's showing your credibility and giving Dave the confidence. Like Dave has got his own job. He's busy. He's come to you for this. So you've got to actually show some credibility and some confidence to guide him, to redirect him. So the way I often explain it is basically this is the training request they ask for. And if you just listen to what they say, you'll end up just delivering the content or playing with gamification or doing something crazy, right? It's like when you go to a doctor and you say, well, I think I need morphine, like the doctor won't turn around, hopefully, and just give you morphine. The doctor's going to ask questions to dig deeper because you've self-diagnosed And basically you're asking for that. Like, you wouldn't do that as a doctor. Why would you do it as a learning professional? Instead, what you're trying to do is dig deeper behind their request. So if you go in and say, I need morphine, the doctor's going to say, well, tell me about your symptoms, i.e. tell me about your pain. So you dig deeper and you ask about their pain points, and you find the actual performance issue that matters to the organization, and then work out how you can deliver value. It's quite crucial, this concept, that you're not just responding to what they're saying, you're trying to support them to dig deeper. Thanks for a scenario that is depressingly familiar, but an approach that is nice. Yeah, I find that I've done this a few times in different sort of scenarios, different organizations. It's amazing how it resonates in different countries, different organizations. So when I say, a big thing here though, is you can't make your stakeholder wrong. You can't just say, seriously, Dave, gamification, just don't be so distracted by the latest buzzword, Dave. Stop it. You can't say that. As much as you want to say that, you can't say that. You can't make your stakeholder wrong. You've got to acknowledge and then redirect, lead, question as required. And you've got to do it with integrity. You're not being patronizing to them. You're still doing it from a place of integrity and engagement. You've got to empower them and take them on the journey. It's not always easy, right? So, something you might say to Dave is first to thank and acknowledge. So thanks for the PowerPoint, Dave. You've obviously been really busy. So that's true. You believe that, like he's done this PowerPoint and he's always busy. So yep, it's got integrity. Then you can acknowledge, look, that's a really useful, because he's just talked about how his team's competitive and he wants to go with the gamification. So you could say something like, that's a really useful insight about your team being competitive, Dave. Gamification can really be effective, and we've had some interesting experiences with it, which we can explore with you when we get into the detail of the solution. So what you're doing here is you're acknowledging Dave for that insight, like you're even calling it an insight. Thanks for that insight, Dave. That's given us some valuable food for thought about your team, because we know that they're competitive. Then you're saying, you're building your credibility. Yep, I really understand gamification. It can be really effective, and we've had some interesting experiences. And you're saying, we can talk about it later. Because what you're doing is you're taking what he's saying, you're not just ignoring it or deflecting it, you're taking what he's saying, you're acknowledging it, and you're saying, and we'll talk about later, think about your kid. It's like, if your kid picks up this stick and starts like wanting to whack something with it, you're saying, oh, wow. You don't just like hit them and say, no, that's not right. You basically say, well, that's a fantastic stick. I wonder if we could turn that into a fishing rod. You're basically acknowledging them and you're redirecting them. And I'm not meaning to sound patronizing to stakeholders. I've got full respect for stakeholders. They will often come with insights, and they will often come with distractions because they haven't put as much thought into this as you have, because this is your career. This is their Monday morning meeting. And then finally, the redirect is, and for the next 30 minutes, we've found that we can make the most use of your time by working through a simple process. Are you ready to start? Again, I'm not asking, is that okay with you? Or I used to do that. Now I just say, are you ready to go? Or do you want to sit there or there? Like you basically giving them the confidence that you know the process and you're taking them on this journey. So some points, it's important to, yeah, absolutely. You can't just make them wrong. Even if you see the answer up front, you can't just sort of make them wrong with it. It always surprises me how many people think they are the L&D experts having never done the job. And look, they are the expert. Yeah, absolutely. And they are the experts in their own world. So he is the expert with his team and with sales, basically. So he still brings something valuable to the table. That's why when you say, oh, thanks for that insight into your team, it's really like you mean it, because he's given you some insights which you didn't have before. Also, I need a crash course on patience. Yeah, you do. And I think it's really about embracing your role as someone who's influencing and selling and supporting someone. It's almost, I would look up on Model Thinkers, look up permission structure. It's a really good model about how you take someone on a journey to change their mind rather than making them wrong. Just permission structure. It's from politics. It always surprises me how many people, sorry, I thought I marked those answered. What if you're having to collaborate with another L&D person who is also solutioneering? I mean, if they're your colleague or even your manager, you might have to manage up. You might need to support, that's a conversation that you need to have as professionals, frankly, to try to really interrupt that solutioneering. And again, don't make them wrong. Say, oh, wow, it's really tempting to jump to solutions, isn't it, Joe? And I know that, and we both know, I guess, that, from our experience, that we know we're going to get most out of day by not just jumping to solution up front. Hey, so again, you're not making them wrong. You say, wow, I really get that, Joe. I want to do that too. And we both know, as in they're experienced as well, they can get these insights as well, that you're going to get there. So again, you're trying to not make them feel stupid is the key thing. Yep, facilitation skills, influencing skills, frankly. Fantastic, gone through those questions. So we'll keep going. Okay, so when the next bit is for the co-design session, or what is essentially a co-design session, you want to keep it visual, you want to frame up the meeting really clearly, and you want to work to a plan and still be flexible. So in terms of working to the plan, this is the first page of the performance canvas, and this is not what you show the stakeholder, it's too much information. This is really your guide. And you can see counterintuitively, it starts from future state. Over here, it starts with 1 over future state, then comes back to current state, then looks at the gap. So the reason I start with future state, as you'll see, is that if you start with current state, it basically embeds the assumptions that people are already making. So basically, as you work with future state, people are already assuming that it's a particular audience group, or assuming that you're going to target a particular group or particular area. And it just plays into those solutions, where if you start with future state, it often is going to free up the rest of the process. So this is what I would actually draw up on a virtual whiteboard or a physical whiteboard. Basically, future state, current state, and the gap. And I literally just draw that little target, like that's the goal we're going for. And it's pretty simple. And you basically say to Dave, so Dave, what we're going to do is really in the next 30 minutes, what we found to be the most efficient use of your time, and helps us get what we really need most effectively, is to define what future state is, look at what success looks like for you. Then we're going to look at current state, and I'm going to use a quick persona to do that. And we can obviously dig deeper depending on what we need after this meeting, because we've only got 30 minutes right now. And then I'm going to do a quick gap analysis to look at how we can shift these people how we can shift their behavior to help reach success for you. So really starting with what success looks like for you. I'll get to that question in a moment, that comment or question. So success is the hardest bit, right? Defining success, unfortunately, it comes at the beginning. This is the hardest bit of the process. And you kind of know if you've nailed this process or not by how well you pin down an effective future state. So typically, people will come in with, they need to know, they need to understand, they need to learn. Sometimes it's they need to feel, or they need to get, you know, it's essentially very like just really tactical individual learning goals. There's also these overarching business goals that people don't usually think about. And then these performance goals, which are your gold. The performance goals are something like, we need to get this performance outcome, which will be measured by this metric. And that when you're talking about this performance outcome, one of the ways I sort of, it's not a scientific rule, but one of the ways I think about it is that a performance outcome that is needed to be achieved by a team as opposed to an individual? Like if it's, or multiple teams, you know, is this something that the groups of people in the organization need to achieve? So, you know, we need to improve customer engagement and repeat sales. That's a performance outcome, and it's measured by NPS and sales data, other metrics. I will just quickly go to this comment. On the topic of solutioneering and colleagues, aligning with your L&D colleagues on your approach with Dave is a key discussion. Yep, it's all in the prep, especially if they're your colleagues. And you don't have to go with the process I'm talking about. Obviously, there's lots of variations, and you might already have your own approach or your own approach in the organization. I think the key thing is to make sure that you are sharing literacy around it. What I found with some experienced people in a large telco, I did a job, and very experienced people, but they all did things totally differently. And to the point where they weren't even good at talking about the way they did it because they didn't have a framework. So even going through a framework like this, you can start to, even for those of you who are really experienced and kind of use the force, you know, kind of do it intuitively, you can start to break down your process a bit more consciously and have a conversation with someone else. So it's essentially bringing your mental models to light and being able to compare and have a conversation beforehand about how you're going to run the meeting. The other thing, when you're running with multiple people, I really like to say who's going to lead in this meeting and who's going to play support. And it's not about hierarchy. It's not about the senior person having to lead. It's just knowing that which person is going to take the lead in the meeting, because otherwise what I find is that you tend to kind of not want to, you know, L&D people are so polite and they'll not want to jump on other person's feet or toes. And so they'll kind of be hesitant. Whereas if someone knows that they're leading and they're owning that meeting, they will take the fore, and this support person is really just feeding them prompts, giving them like suggestions in the background. So just getting that clear. And again, it's not about hierarchy. It's not about who's senior. It's just, and you can switch it up. It's about just being clear on who's owning it. Okay, so this is, in terms of those success factors, I find that there tends to be a bit of this sort of objective pyramid is the way I call it. So there tend to be the business objectives up top and then the tactical stuff down the bottom. The fact is our clients will come to us, our stakeholders will come to us at this bottom end. They'll tend to say, people need to know, people need to learn, people need to understand, right? That's where they're coming from. The business objectives are the strategic goals that the executives and the CEO care about. And theoretically, the rest of the organization should be caring about, but it's most in the forefront for that senior leadership group. And then the performance objectives are what we're trying to translate to. So here's 2 questions that you can ask to try to shift that success factor kind of question from your client. When they start in the bottom, the first way is you can make them climb up the ladder slowly. And I get sick of hearing myself say this phrase, but it's really useful. You say, that's great, Dave. And what would that give us? So, and what would that give us is the phrase. So they need to learn how to do spin sales. That's fantastic, Dave. And once they learn how to do spin sales, what would that give us? And what you're doing there is you're forcing Dave to sort of just think the next stage up, like you're slowly moving up this ladder to say, and well, you know, if they did spin sales, that would get us more sales. And if, you know, that would allow them to close more effectively or whatever that is, right? And so you're slowly kind of pushing him up. The other way you can do it is start from the top to sort of break open their perspective, because they're so tactical, right? When they come to you and they're not thinking really about, like, even if they're strategic people, they've come to you for a tactical request because that's the way they see you as a tactical person who can just create this content. It's like they've gone to order coffee over there and they've gone to order their training over here. That's the way they're currently working, and no criticism of them. That's just the way that our industry has positioned itself, unfortunately, and what we need to reframe. So one of the ways you're trying to break them out of that sort of tactical view is by saying, so Dave, I'm just curious to know if you, in 6 months' time, you got into the lift with Jane, our CEO, and Jane just turns to you and says, oh, so Dave, you spent this 6 months, you spent this money on that project, working with, you know, so-and-so. What did you achieve? Dave is not going to turn around to the CEO and say, well, people learned how to do spin sales, right? If Dave's got a clue, particularly if Dave is like, you know, business minded, Dave is going to tell the CEO something that matters to them. So that's another way that you break out of the tactical and try to get these performance objectives in the middle. How do you create clear performance goals around soft skills? Essential, for example, developing leaders on empowering their team. Again, I think it's really tough, and it's really trying to get quite concrete about what that looks like in your context and how will you know it happened. So what's it delivering? So tying it to some outcome is crucial rather than just the broad, we all need to be more adaptive. Like, what does that mean? It means that we might need to be able to quickly test new ideas. We need to support this automation that's coming through. We need to be able to reskill this part of the business. So there's actually some like key things that are behind the requests around those broad adaptability kind of frames, for example. But they're tough, I agree. So here's the big tip. Aim to identify one main performance outcome to anchor the rest of the process around. It is really hard. Again, this is the hardest bit. This is why I'm spending so long on this bit. It is the hardest part. So as you work with Dave, so Dave will say, well, what does success look like? I told you the sales team needs to know how to use the spin model, and that would be a success. So I can go with my 2 approaches. I can either say, that's fantastic, Dave, and what would that give us? And what would that give us? And keep asking that to push him up the ladder. The other way is I could try to give Dave more perspective by doing that CEO question up front. So this is what happened with Dave. This is like based on reality of a job I did many years ago. So, you know, he starts with, and you write it all down. You don't make him wrong. You write whatever he puts down on the board. So sales staff need to learn the spin model. But in my head, that's saying, well, that's tactical. I'm not saying that to Dave. I'm saying, oh, great, Dave. And what would that give us? Well, sales staff would then learn how to close more. And I'm saying, fantastic. And then I'll say, okay, Dave, so just say you get into the CEO, what would you say to the CEO? He would say something like, well, we're going to increase profitability by 15% over 3 years. And then you talk about expanding the widget sales by 10% over 2 years. I mean, immediately when you go there, you start to expand his perspective a bit beyond the tactical. We need a successful launch of the new widget range, which is interesting. And then you find this one, we need to prioritize sales of our new widget range. Because, you know, in this conversation you're having with Dave as you're writing, and what actually happened to me was, as I got to here, I didn't mark it off straight away. I said, oh, so I'm just curious to know, how is this going to be achieved? How is this sort of increase in profitability going to happen? He said, well, the key thing is this new product range. And so again, it was you're just trying to prioritize. And I don't circle this. I would say, so Dave, I either ask him straight out, which one do you think is the most important of these, or I give him my opinion as a question. So I say, oh, Dave, I'm just curious to know, from what you've said, it really sounds like what this job is really about is about prioritizing the sales of this new widget range, because that's going to be crucial to get this outcome. Is that correct? Is that your read of it? And you'll see, you're not saying, I, the hero, have decided that this is what the case is. You're saying, oh, Dave, from what you've told me, from this, you know, excellent information you're sharing with me right now, I can really see that this is where I think the project is. Is that your understanding as well? So you see, you're making him right. You're empowering Dave. Again, it's the way I'm breaking it down. It sounds a bit manipulative, but it's true. Like, he has come to you with this information. You're just helping him get that, and you're helping him focus. I do have to go on. Sorry for that question mark person. So the next thing we're going to do is we've looked at future state now, and we've identified this key kind of performance objective, and there's some metrics which I'm not going to go into right now. Next is we're looking at current state. So how do we look at current state? We look at possible groups of people who will deliver. So I'll basically say, so Dave, who's involved in achieving this outcome? And typically you're going to go to job role, but you might also look at different segments. You might look at location, you might look at seniority, you might look at experience, you might look at attitude, you might look at tenure. Sometimes, very rarely, you're going to go to demographic. Most, like 90% of the time, you're going to start off by looking at job role, and then maybe fill out some of these other things in the context of job roles. So for Dave, it might be as simple as saying, well, you know, there's the B2C sales team, you know, who are 70 people. That's the business to consume, like, you know, direct to market sales team. There's also the B2B sales team who sell to other businesses. There's customer service, there's account managers, and there's operations staff. And so he's given you the list of who could be involved. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to apply the Pareto Principle, the 80-20 rule, which is the model that I live my life by, the 80-20 rule, which is always trying to find the 20% of effort that is going to get you the 80% of value. And you basically, one of the ways I say it is, so Dave, if you had a magic wand and you change the behavior of one of the groups you've outlined, which one would have the biggest impact on achieving our goal of that successful launch of the new product line? So he's identified the performance goal. So that's your anchor point. You're going to keep bringing it back to that. So you're not talking about who needs spin sales. You're tying this back to that key point of what performance outcome. And thanks, Shai, for sharing the Pareto Principle link. It's one of my favorite models ever. And it's so simple, and yet it's so powerful. So you're basically applying the Pareto Principle, and you're trying to say, who is the 20 that will deliver the 80% of success? Because you've only got 30 minutes. Later on, you might consider other audience groups as well. But yeah, basically you're trying to get there quickly. I mean, some other tips, I don't always use this. I mean, you can use magnitude is really what you tend to rely on. Which group must change the most to create success, or will change to create that success, really. And then you might also go with mayhem, which group is the biggest risk if they don't change, or magnification, which group will have the biggest positive influence if they change, because they might have a ripple effect. But really it's asking, who are the ones that if we change them will actually get those results? And in this case, Bob, this is what I love. About 10% of the times when I do this process, in this case, Bob may have thought that the original job was about this B2C sales team, because if he just focuses on spin sales, he thinks, well, I need to get spin sales across most of my team, and most of my team is this B2C group. But when you actually put it in terms of prioritizing sales of the new widgets, he might say, well, actually the main group that sells the most volume is actually these people that sell to organizations. So if we shift their behavior, they're going to get us the fastest and the most impact here. So he's identified his big audience group. And again, we say, well, we're not just focusing in on them, but we're going to initially look at from their perspective, just to get some traction and to frame up this question. And we might come back to these other audience groups who are still important as well. So some persona tips quickly, because the next step I'd use is a really quick persona. And I'm not, the whole presentation could be on personas, and I'm not going to go there. I would say you experiment with segmentation and types of groups. So it might be, particularly around attitude or something like that, like some other perspectives on personas. I would not include gender and age unless it's directly relevant. I tend to use, Sam, Alex, names like that, which are gender neutral, and basically not go to gender and age, because I find, even though you might argue having gender and age helps people empathize with a real person, I find that they bring too much unconscious bias and too many assumptions as soon as you give a gender and age. Like if it's a young woman, suddenly she's got, like in people's heads, she's got kids and she's like, like is totally digital literate. And if it's an older guy, it's suddenly like he's grumpy, and it's like, it's all these assumptions. So don't go there unless you need to, unless it's relevant for the job. Know that a quick personas are extremely limited without deeper investigation. Again, I could do a whole presentation on my love-hate relationship with personas. Consider current versus future state, and I'll explain that in a sec. Keep going till there's empathy. Like, you don't want to just have this two-dimensional persona of just some caricature. You want to actually empathize with them. Often the typical way I work with someone like Dave, who's working with his team, I would say, one way you can do this, Dave, is to think of two people in your team who kind of would be the most useful for us to target, and just do a combination of them for the persona. That's what authors do. They don't just write about a person in real life. They would typically do a combo. And then go deeper where you can. And also look at the jobs to be done framework. It's worth looking at that at Model Thinkers. I know it's a plug on Model Thinkers, but jobs to be done is an alternative view to personas, and it's really useful sometimes, particularly, anyway, I'm not going to go there because I can't afford to geek out about it. But Shai, maybe do share that jobs to be done one, because that's an interesting one. So here's the way I do personas is I basically go with goals, pain, and needs and insights. And that up here is current state. And I'm not saying this is the only way to do personas, this is the way I do it. So I do current state up here. So their goals, their current pain, and their needs and insights. And here, this bottom bit is in relation to the change. So in this case, it's in relation to this workshop. So this is you, what's your goals? Get through the big workload I have on my plate, make a positive impact, develop my career. What's your pain? Kept busy on training content, responding to requests, being pushed to develop ineffective training, too often seen as the optional extra, lack of training and support to do things differently. Is this resonating with you? Needs and insights. I need to get through my workload and get stuff done. I want credibility and respect for my contribution. I want to develop myself to extend my impact. I want the tools and skills to develop my career. And so that's all current state, right? In relation to this workshop, this session, you might feel curious, skeptical, but also hopeful. And so feeling is the emotion. The think is what's the thought, what's the voice in your head that you don't share, say. So this all sounds good now, but how am I going to get the time and support to do things differently at work? And then what you do is you go through the motions of the workshop with half a mind on your to-do list, just waiting for you when you get back to your real work. Have I got that sort of right for you? So you get the idea, and you can develop personas in a more developed way as well, which I'm not going to go into. The point is here, we've done future state, we've done current state, and then we're basically going through this persona of his or her role, the context. So based on the officer's goals, they've got to meet sales KPIs. These are salespeople, so they're maintaining strong personal brand and customer relationships that deliver on promises. Pain points, so time and too many priorities, mistrust after previous launch. This actually happened to me. This was actually what came up in a pain point of a current state persona. And my spidey sense went bing around mistrust after previous launch, given that we're trying to actually launch something new. Reputation with clients. So you can see that this person cares about their reputation and they were burned. So needs and insights. They need actual priorities and time to implement. They want confidence that the new products will be delivered on time and as promised. And based on their history, they don't believe that. So in relation to selling the new product range, this is now the future state. They're nervous, they're suspicious, they're skeptical. That's the feelings. And what they think is, they screwed up last time and burnt my reputation. Why would this time be any different? And so what they do is they pay lip service to launch, to the launch, and then they focus on the sales of the old stock, which is tested and they can rely on, and they'll wait and see whether the new stuff is actually going to be delivered effectively. So right there, you actually see the performance challenge here, and it doesn't always work out neatly as this. So don't, I will not hit the answer often with, not often, probably about, I don't know, 10 or 15%. It's not as clean and you kind of have to come back to it. But the point is, sometimes in this process, you'll hit something like that and you've just got to be really open and ready to hear it. So the next is we're doing the gap analysis. So we've done future state, we've done current state, we've taken a bit of a snapshot of current state through a persona of one group. So it's a very narrow, superficial current state snapshot, but it's still useful in a 30-minute conversation with Dave to take Dave on this journey. Next is you're saying to Dave, we're going to do this gap analysis, Dave. We're going to look at what behaviors this person needs to actually get to future state. And when you talk about behaviors, they'll typically say things like, well, they need to understand and they'll need to know. And so that's where you basically, and this was from Julie Durkinson, I think. I heard her say once, when you talk about behaviors, because I would always say, you have to see behaviors, you have to see behaviors. And she mentioned in passing that, she talks about being on a video camera. I found that really useful when you actually say, can you see the behavior on a video camera? Because if you say, can you see the behavior, for some reason, it doesn't absorb in people's head, but can you say, if you could see it on a video camera? I know that sounds creepy, but it actually does really help them to actually get it. So some of the behaviors: reach out to existing customers and book meetings, contact previous customers, have a needs-based sales conversation, build and launch and share marketing collateral, ask effective questions to engage with customers, recommend new products in relation to needs, close effectively, maintain and renew pipeline. I'm going to go to the questions and comments at the end because I'm running pretty low on time. One of the ways you can prioritize behaviors. So like with everything, I'm going to go Pareto. I'm going to Pareto this and try to find where's the highest value. One of the ways you can help find the highest value, well, firstly, the way you ask is saying, so Dave, of all these behaviors, which one or two is most going to get us to this outcome? To which one is most going to get us to prioritize sales of the new widget range? So if Sam was to adopt one or two of these behaviors, what would give us the most impact? The other way you can do is this model, which is developed around high value behaviors, which is to say, which are the high risk ones? So if they're not done properly, they have a significant negative impact. Which ones just happen all the time that you need to know? So like your bread and butter. Which ones are the high challenge, the ones that they're going to typically get wrong? And this is my optional extra. What are high performers doing? This alone is, even if you don't take the rest of it, is a useful just frame to dig out which high value behaviors there are in a situation. So in this case, Dave's identified 3. So reach out to existing customers, have needs-based conversations, and recommend new products in relation to needs. The next thing I do is this quick KSME thing, which is basically, I explained to Dave, so Dave, and I'm going to flag now that I'm not going to get to the solution thing. I'll just show you it. I'm not going to talk about it so much. I already flagged that initially, so I wasn't planning to go there, but just looking at the time. So Dave, so with any behavior change, there's potentially 4 blocks is the way I would talk to Dave, because you need to do a bit of education here. So just say, Dave, that this person is trying, just say you're trying to get through this door, right? And I'd say, so firstly, there might be knowledge. So I might be able to tell you how to unlock the door and you could go do it. And then, so that's the knowledge block. In addition to that, the door might have a special lock, which requires practice. So if I give you information about how to unlock the door, it's not enough. You've actually got to practice it and to really develop the skill to actually unlock the door. So you might have the knowledge, but you might not have the skill, and that might need to be developed. Similarly, you might have the knowledge, you might have the skill, but you might not have the mindset or motivation. You might be thinking, well, yeah, you can do it and you know how to unlock that lock. You've done the practice, but you don't care. You don't want to leave the room. You're happy here, or you believe that you can't leave the room. There's a mindset block there. Finally, you might want to go through the door. You might have the skills and the knowledge to do it, but the environment might be preventing you. You might be too busy. There might be too many other obstacles in your way, or whatever it is. So it's knowledge, skills, mindset, environment. And once Dave gets that, and it's very intuitive, what I took about 1 minute to explain it, you basically get Dave to label these different things. And it's important that Dave does it because the same thing might be knowledge or skill in a different context. Dave knows his people and his context more than you. And that's where he is actually labeling these things. You might say, oh, I'm curious to know, I'm wondering if this is actually a bit to do with skills as well. So, you know, just not telling him, but like just saying, I'm curious and I'm just wondering if, and posing it like that. But this is where Dave is actually giving you his insights. And you can see a lot of it is mindset, motivation, skills. And you see at this point, you've actually reframed the question for Dave, and Dave has actually reframed the question for himself. In a perfect world, he would actually say, so we need to increase sales of our new product range by targeting the B2B sales team. Given we know getting them on board is primarily a mindset and motivation challenge, what would you recommend? So you can see, rather than it being just about spin sales, you've reframed the whole conversation around saying, well, we need to prioritize the new sales range. We know that this group is crucial. We know that these behaviors are our priority behaviors. And you can see just from this, that mindset and motivation is a big theme. Skills is also there, particularly around having these sales conversations, and they need to know a bit about the knowledge of the new product range. But really, mindset, motivation, and the mindset block, particularly around being suspicious of the last launch and not having confidence in the team, that's the real job. And you can see what you've done here is you've taken Dave on this journey. You haven't made Dave wrong. You've actually used his insights to get you there. So that's the sort of end process right there. I'll go to questions now. We're sort of, are you getting all, yes, it is scary, but you are trying to get this done in 30 minutes. It really should take an hour. If you can get away with booking an hour meeting, do it. But really, 30 minutes is all you can do. And that's why you can't be distracted by gamification and other distractions like that. Often it will feel rushed. And often, particularly with mindset and motivation, you'll feel like you need to go deeper into the conversation with your audience group. So it's just a starting point. And if Dave's on site at that point, he can see why you might need to do some follow-up. This is becoming a minimum 1 hour meeting. Yeah, look, I agree. It is ideally a 1 hour meeting, and I have done them in half an hour quite regularly. I've done them in less. So it does take practice, and you're going to have to skip through things pretty fast. I would spend about 10 minutes pinning down success factors, about 5 minutes doing the sort of audience-y quick persona, like 5 to 7 minutes, and then the gap analysis. So like the 10-minute block on the success factors is the hardest bit. Got more questions here. And says, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. This is becoming, got that one. When you work through with a stakeholder, are you able to get through all that? Yes, that's a big theme. Would you think all managers in a business could do this consulting? Have you trained more than just learning people? I don't think you have to train more than learning people. I think this is kind of our job, but I mean, other people will do variations of this, which aren't performance consulting, which is more consulting. You know, BAs will do their own sorts of consulting. So there are variations on the theme. Make Dave think. Yes, you are really, I love it when they actually have to look up in the air and ask questions of themselves, which they hadn't thought of beforehand in this case. Any thoughts on sending the canvases of pre-work for the client workshop? I mean, my problem with that is they might react, especially if you don't have that relationship with them, they might react and say, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I just want to talk to you about gamification. I find if they're going to be hostile, if they're open, yes, do that. But if they're potentially hostile or not hostile, if they've got a different agenda than your current agenda, then you're best dealing with it live in the session rather than having that conversation with them. Preparation, would you ask Dave to do? Yeah, I don't. Just again, because if he gets like particularly if he's on a different track, if you give him warning that you're going in this direction, then you're going to lose him. Once you get them engaged, always want to spend more. Yeah, it's true. And this is a big thing. So this half an hour is often going to lead to something else, especially if mindset, and I didn't go to solutions, and it will be in the pack, it will be in the guide about if it's knowledge, you're going to go with this way. If it's skill, you're going to use deliberate practice. If it's mindset, you're going to go with more marketing approaches. So it's all like the diagnosis is the hard bit. The solutions is the easier bit. I know people are going to have to drop off now because we've just hit 9 o'clock. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to stay here for another 5 just to answer these last few questions. So thank you so much for being here. We'll follow up with the guide, which will be a 15-page guide early next year. and this recording will be available. So thank you all for joining the session today, and for being so patient with Dave. And again, thank you so much. And please do subscribe to the free newsletter on Model Thinkers. And that's a way that, as Shai and I discuss each week what we're writing, and then I write that every weekend. So do subscribe to that free newsletter on Model Thinkers, and do link up with me on LinkedIn if you're not done there already. And I will stay here and answer these last few questions. So bye everyone who has to go. I really understand if you have to go. And thanks for those of you who came at crazy times in your time zone. I want to find that yep, absolutely. I'm interested in knowing more about the solutions you suggest to address the 4 common blocks, if it's primarily an environmental block. My go-to there, if you want to go to Model Thinkers, is the EAST framework. And if you look at the second page of the performance canvas, it uses the EAST framework, and there's more written about the EAST framework on the Behavioral Insights team, but also I've summarized it on Model Thinkers under EAST framework. So that's my first, and also habit formation, the habit loop and EAST framework. If you look up those 2 things on Model Thinkers, that will serve you well. Actually, just the other things, if you look up for skills, you look up deliberate practice. For knowledge, you look up spaced retrieval. And also for knowledge, it's also thinking about how can you capture that knowledge outside of their brain. And mindset and motivation, you probably want to go to value proposition. That's a really helpful model as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, look, I would really, I mean, I mentioned Julie Durkinson, her book is fantastic. I think Kathy Moore's action mapping book is brilliant. Similar structure to this, but tends to focus a bit more on e-learning rather than the bigger blended programs. But I think you can kind of adapt, and it's probably the most aligned in that respect. And then there's a number of other books that would be great. And thanks for liking Model Thinkers. At which point would we question the correctness, precision of interpretation of Dave? Yeah, brilliant. One of the questions I ask is saying, at a certain point, again, not making Dave wrong, I'd say, I'm just curious to know, Dave, how often you actually work with an Alex, if that's your, I can't remember the name of the persona, how often you're in contact with an Alex? And if they're only in contact with an Alex or the persona, they might say, well, I used to be an Alex. And I'd say, oh, so was that a while ago? Was that maybe more than 5 years ago? And they say, yeah, it was 10 years ago. And so then you're trying to get them to realize that their knowledge isn't the most up to date and most reliable. And so particularly if it's mindset and motivation, at the end, I would say, as you can see, Dave, this is largely about mindset and motivation. And we know that when we're really trying to shift mindset and motivation, it's really about the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And when we're focusing on what's in it for me, we really need to understand that me more than maybe what we've done in this quick half-an-hour session. So I think maybe the next steps here are to really go and talk to some of your people and to understand some of the blocks about that last launch, and to see how we can shift that attitude and shift that mindset block. And Dave will get it at that point because he himself has identified what the block is going to be. So great to have a refresher, Aaron. Thank you. You've obviously done one of my workshops before. Yeah, the guide is coming, and apologies that the guide is late. I've just been too busy with finishing off my other work recently. Those clients are on the call. You know who you are, who've been keeping me crazy busy. Would you start with end user interviews rather than Dave to map future and current states? I mean, I don't know. In my experience, it's often hard to get the time of those people up front. But yeah, this scales. In the guide, there's a way of scaling this for really large jobs, which will go over like 3 days of workshops for big design thinking things, which is much more involved. And you can see that this becomes the skeleton frame, and there's a lot more empathy interviews, there's the, there's the prototyping and so on. So it does scale, but I guess you don't always have to go here to end user interviews. You don't have to go there necessarily if it's a relatively simple job. So just being fit for purpose and knowing, like if it does end up being a knowledge-based job, and you might not need to actually go into those broader interviews. Still got 100 of you on the thing, even though we're running a bit late. So thank you. Why don't you ask, how would Alex describe? It's a FOMO, isn't it? You're worried about missing out on something before you go. So I find it useful to ask, how would Alex describe this situation? That is great in terms of finding that empathy. I really like that one. Thank you for sharing. Are we still going to get Model Thinkers newsletter when you? Yes, I am doing my newsletter every weekend still. It's one of my pleasures in my life of being able to summarize something and get it out into the world. So the Model Thinkers newsletter and updates are still happening. I'm still involved in Model Thinkers. I'm just not doing any consulting in my full-time work with ANZ. So yep, still supporting model thinkers. ANZ have been really great with supporting that process. Thank you so much. That's all the questions. So again, really appreciate your time today. We'll share the pack, we'll share the videos, we'll share the guides. It just might not be overnight. So if we haven't got you stuff, if we haven't put stuff online by about February next year, feel free to hassle us. Otherwise, until then, yeah, link up with Shai myself on LinkedIn, and do definitely sign up for that Model Thinkers newsletter. It's a really, I honestly write it to think of how can I give someone the most actionable tidbit in the fastest way possible, so they can get on with their day. That's the way that we frame it. So yep, do try, give it a go. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sure I'll see you around. And you haven't heard the last of me, even though I'm focusing my attention in on ANZ, I'll still be part of the community. So thank you very much, everyone.